So the other part of this project that I thought might be interesting is my own learning as a lecturer. And when I started this project, I'm afraid I was something of a Luddite. I still am, but it's a comparative process, I guess. I didn't have a mobile phone. I'd never been on Facebook. I certainly didn't blog. Email was about as technically proficient as I could get. I could manage Blackboard basics, but never tried to do anything terribly sophisticated. So I was really, I guess, imagining myself starting right at the point that the students were starting, and my view was that if I could do it, then they could do it. And I decided I wouldn't ask them to do anything that I couldn't do. And I wanted that to be really transparent to students. Some of that was about making the learning field feel a bit easier. It was also about me knowing exactly what students were struggling with and to be alongside them as a co-learner as much as a lecturer. So one of the things I did was set up my own blog page and talked about this broader project that I was actually pulling together in the same way that students were demonstrating an interest in a social project of their own. And I called this process in practice because I wanted to find a way of thinking about the processes students were using in the practice of community development, because I found it interesting that we in community development we teach all this stuff about relationships, and yet students were struggling to develop relationships within the classroom. So I was keen to know whether blended learning mechanisms might assist them to actually demonstrate the very things they were supposed to be using. So I set up this blog page as a way of explaining the project. So here you can see I've got the background to it, about why I set it up and what my interest was. And then there's a bit of information here which explains the methodology and the conceptualization of the project, and how I was holding it together in my own mind. And you'll see here that I was very much thinking of it as an action learning cycle. So doing this alongside students enabled me to imagine problems as students came across them and come up with solutions with the students. Now, as I said, that also then meant that the technology aspect blew out much more than I anticipated, and it became much bigger than I'd hoped. But it also meant that it was a very dynamic project, and I could demonstrate to students that just like community development that they were learning about, a lot of this stuff isn't something you can necessarily plan for in advance. You've actually got to be able to engage in very dynamic systems. So it was useful for doing that. And what I love is that quite a few of the students, you can see this, actually engaged with my blog and gave me feedback on the day's class or what they thought of my reflections. And so I'm reflecting on their reflections and they're reflecting on mine. So I came up with this blog, and this pretty much captures my project throughout the semester, my thinking, some of the interesting comments from students. So here's one where because I had to get ethical approval and get the students to fill out surveys, and one of them made the point that I feel like I'm just being used for a university experiment. So what I named as innovative teaching and co-learning, they named as being used. So there was some interesting framing of these issues as well. Also thinking about what's the role of me as a teacher in this project, and the idea of being an agent provocateur to try and encourage different ways of thinking. So this is basically my blog page, and the whole point, I think, for a teacher is to demonstrate ourselves as learners alongside our students. And for me that was really important, to try and break that whole idea of the student versus the expert, which runs countercultural to community development processes anyway. It's the idea that we all mutually learn from one another, and hopefully that's what that blog demonstrated.